Chapter 6 is a great chapter. There's lots and lots of information in here. Lots of it you already know from anatomy, physiology, but there's some things that you don't know. So I just want to make sure that you don't fall asleep in this chapter, because a lot of it's going to sound really familiar, but there's some twists and differences that I want to make sure you get. And I bet you some of the things that you see that you say, oh, I remember that from anatomy and physiology, you probably don't remember as well as I want you to for this class. So just make sure you stay with me and pay attention as we're going through. Chapter 6 is all about metabolism, and I'll just preface that by saying that pretty much everything that we know about happening in our bodies was figured out from understanding E. coli and from understanding Saccharomyces and other organisms that do many of the things the same way that we do. And so metabolism's been understood and known for a long time. Way back in the 1800s, Pasteur and others were debating on what's going on as you feed microorganisms grape juice and how they produce the alcohol and the yeast. And I think this textbook still has a cartoon caricature in it that shows a yeast cell that is actually munching on some sugar. I see you guys flipping. Maybe they took it out, but basically the Germans, remember, we're in Europe now, and Pasteur was French, and the Germans think French people can't be too smart and must drink too much wine. And so basically they were trying to figure out how the yeast cells produce the alcohol. And so Pasteur hypothesized that the sugars are being taken into the cells of the yeast, they're being broken down, and then alcohol and carbon dioxide are being released from the cells. But the Germans couldn't accept that idea. They actually mocked him, and there's a nice caricature cartoon that's out there showing a yeast cell actually munching on sugar and spitting out alcohol and carbon dioxide, and that's essentially what they do. But the Germans couldn't believe it since Pasteur was saying this. So he did some simple experiments. He took a clear solution of sugar, ammonia, and all the minor and major elements that were necessary. He added just a few yeast cells, and he showed that they grew. The sugar concentration decreased, and the alcohol concentration increased. And so that supported his idea, but he tried to extract some things from inside the cell, but couldn't get those extracts to use the sugar. But then later, Edna Bucher, a chemist, actually showed that he took yeast cells, crushed them, mixed them with the same kind of chemicals, and those crushed yeast cells actually broke down the chemicals and made alcohol and CO2. Later, Buchner got the Nobel Prize. Some of you in chemistry class may have used a funnel that's named after Edward Buchner called the Buchner funnel. I'm sure you'll play with that somewhere along the way in one of your chemistry classes as you're going through. So microbial metabolism basically has to do two fundamental tasks. It's got to synthesize the new components of the cell, and it's got to be able to harvest energy to power those processes. Altogether, we call those two things metabolism. Getting the components to be able to synthesize the structures that are needed and the energy that is needed to do all of that is the process of metabolisms. So as far as what implications there are for us, we can use this process to make biofuels. We can use it to produce some foods. We can do a lot of things in the laboratory that are important to us. Models for study of many different pathways to understand what's going on in our cells. And also we can use unique pathways as potential targets for new drugs. Remember, as we're thinking about battling microorganisms, we want to try to figure out what's new and unique and different about them, because those are potentially targets that we can hit. If they're doing something different, there must be an enzyme that's unique to that process. If we can figure out something to target that enzyme, then we can begin to block that process. So there are really two parts of metabolism. One is called catabolism, one is called anabolism. You guys should all know anabolism, because it seems like every year for the last 5 or 10 years, some athlete has gotten involved for taking anabolic steroids. Right? Why do they take anabolic steroids? What are they trying to do when they take those anabolic steroids? What do they hope will happen? build muscle, get faster, get stronger, get more muscle mass so they can lift more or hit stronger or whatever it might be. So if they're trying to build muscle by taking anabolic steroids, then you should be able to figure out that anabolism is building things up, making things from smaller subunits. And catabolism is breaking things down, breaking things from bigger molecules to smaller molecules. And catabolism does a couple of things. Catabolism releases the energy that's needed and can be used to make ATP, but it also makes the building blocks that can be used in anabolic metabolism. And then anabolic metabolism is going to be biosynthesis. So if you hear anabolism or anabolic metabolism or biosynthesis, you know that that's all building up, making something bigger out of something smaller, assembling subunits to make macromolecules. Anabolism uses ATP. It needs ATP to drive all of those anabolic reactions. So the cell has to have ATP to be able to do anabolism. And the ATP comes from the catabolic processes. Everybody good with that? So